Foolishness or wisdom? Can you have one and not the other? And it's an interesting point of view that the apostle takes on this idea of God's foolishness and man's wisdom. In the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 1 chapter 1, the first place we'll look. He talks about it, and when he's speaking about it, it is not from the traditional perspective that one would take from a scriptural point of view, but it's from the perspective of how the world may view things. And so this is the lens that he begins to speak in. Because there are some things that God views one way and man views another way, and we see it all in the world around us. So what is God's foolishness and man's wisdom? Well, we jump into 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and in verse 21. Paul writes, "For after that in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. So it pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe." Immediately we jump into the point that Paul makes in verse 21, that after the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. We know that God, the eternal one, is full of wisdom. And man is full of folly. Man is full of foolishness. And when it talks about foolishness, again, here the perspective is folly and wickedness and sin. So that God, in the ways of his wisdom, has demonstrated to us a clear, unmistakable evidence that he desires man to be saved. But yet man by man's wisdom, and here wisdom is certainly not referring to, indeed, quote, divine wisdom being imparted, but just from the knowledge that man has. That men in his own collective wisdom, men in their own wisdom that they have. And so we might say to a person, "Oh, you think you're so smart, don't you?" And we're saying that to be sarcastic, to illustrate that they really don't know anything. You think you have it all figured out and you've mastered every piece. And so you might just say that to them just to get them to think. And this is really what Paul is doing here. He is stating that the world by wisdom knew not God. So by the world's wisdom, by our cumulative wisdom, if you took all the wisdom of the world and be able to lay it all to one point and to stack it up, it does not still drop a speck in the bucket concerning the wisdom of God. But more importantly than that, it is not trying to compare IQ versus IQ. That's not the point. Our IQ would never meet the IQ of the infinite one. It's not talking about IQ, but it's talking again on the basis of salvation. So here it is. He says that for after that the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom, it knew not God. So God is demonstrating, showing forth his mercy, showing his grace, his wisdom, and yet the wisdom of the world, meaning again, not IQ in terms of their intellect or their ability to be able to understand, but in a spiritual discernment that the world then view this as not being wise. So it pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. Isn't it interesting then that Paul makes a change in the point of view that he is taking? He's saying, look, God has demonstrated wisdom. And by wisdom, by men's wisdom looked at God's wisdom and decried that and thought that there must be a better way. Men look at the wisdom that God has exemplified to save the world, and yet the men come up and say, well, there must be a better way. So instead of choosing salvation as a free gift, I'd rather work my way to get to heaven. Instead of choosing salvation as a free gift that God has given to all the world, I'd rather make a gift or pay to be able to get to heaven. Instead of believing that the just are saved by faith, I would rather do penance and beat my body and make sacrifices, maybe give up food or some type of prized possession as a way of being able to show I have attained, I have achieved. And so what about this, would this work, would this be an exchange? And Paul says that is foolishness. Now here it then says that it pleased God then by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. And so as Paul talks about the foolishness of preaching here, he is using the term from the Greek that talks about the announcement of preaching, or the proclamation of salvation. So God is using then something that then is, quote, foolish, to be able to demonstrate or to carry forward. And what is so foolish? It is foolish to the perspective of the Greek and the perspective of the Jew. This whole mystery of salvation, it is beyond their understanding. For the Jews, it says, they require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. So here's the dichotomy in the ancient world, that the Jews were requiring a sign. They needed some type of miracle to attest to the divinity of Christ. Years after the fact that Jesus has died, many still do not receive him as being the Messiah. They're seeking for a sign, and yet Jesus said, no sign will be given other than that sign that was given of Jonah, that he was 3 days in the belly of the whale. So the Son of Man will be 3 days in the belly of the earth. And the Greeks, they seek after wisdom. They're allotted for their wisdom, the Platos of the world, the Socrates of the world, the knowledge that they were able to attain. Yet he says of them that they are seeking steadily after wisdom. So here's the ancient world divided really into two camps. The Jews seeking after a sign, and the Greeks seeking after more wisdom. But he's already stated that the world already had wisdom. They're continuing to seek more and more wisdom to be able to understand, but their wisdom is not leading them towards the eternal, but their wisdom is leading them further and further away from God. Categorically, the Jewish nation is still requiring a sign. And no sign is yet to be given or to be manifest. So how does God meet the needs of man? He says here, by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. And further, he says, but we preach Christ crucified, who unto the Jews is a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks, foolishness. Neither camp could understand how a man could claim to be divine, could claim to be the Son of God, and yet die. Adding to that is the complication that you're saying that this is the Son of God who has come and died, and then you bring forth the theory, the idea that he raised from the dead, or rose from the tomb. So many would look at this and say, you want me to believe that first of all, you want me to believe that the gods who do not dwell with man came down from heaven, took a body, was born of a virgin, and lived on this earth for 33 years, and died, and rose from the grave, and went to heaven. You expect me to believe that? It didn't line with the stories that they knew of their gods. And so to the Greeks, they looked at this as being abject foolishness. And to the Jews then, they looked at this as being a stumbling block, because you want me to again believe this, that God has come down on the earth, and that God would then die upon the tree. And yet the Bible says in the book of Leviticus, and cursed be the man that hangeth upon the tree. So you want me to believe that this Son of God would come and die in the most ignominious form of death, as a common criminal, to not be received by the masses. And so this became a stumbling block, or a thing to be able to separate or to stop many from believing. And Paul is saying that, look, we are talking about Jesus. We're talking about the Christ, the anointed one, who was crucified. To the Jews, it's a stumbling block, and to the Greeks, utter foolishness. But unto those who are called, whether you are Jew or whether you Greek, the Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men. Or putting it another way, God's foolishness is wiser than man's wisdom. For you see then that many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wisdom of the wise. And he has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And he has chosen the base things of the world and those things which are despised, then God has chosen. Meaning, then that God is working in opposite ways in which men anticipate or expect. So men are expecting it to be this way, and God's saying, look, I will show forth the greatness of my majesty and my power. I will pick those things that you will not pick. I will use those to bring glory to me. I'll take the weak, and I will use the weak, and I will be able to make strong. The things that you look at as being valuable, I will pick those things that are invaluable, so that I may be able to show forth my grace and my power and my majesty. So we look in the book of Judges chapter 7 at an incident through the lens or through the life of Jerubbaal, who is also known as Gideon. And of course, God's foolishness is really not foolishness, but man's wisdom. So man looks and says, hey, this is my wisdom. These are the things that we venerate. These are the things that we value. God is showing again that his kingdom is not the same of those things. And as we align with God, then we'll be able to see then that are we emulating then men's foolishness, or rather men's wisdom, or are we seeking to extol the wisdom that comes from God? In Judges chapter 7, verse 1, then Jerubbaal, who was Gideon, and all the people that were with him, they rose up early, and they pitched beside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon in verse 2, the people that you have with you are too many people for me to give the Midianites into your hands. Because if I do this, they're going to vaunt themselves and say that I did it myself. Mine own hand have brought me this honor and this glory. So go therefore and proclaim into the ears of the people and saying that whoever is fearful and whoever is afraid, let them return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned to the people 22,000, and there remain 10,000 people. So in Judges 7, we see this faithful story begin to unfold. Gideon has an army that is called up of 32,000 Hebrews that are going to fight against 132,000 Midianites and Amalekites. It's about 4-1 is what the ratio would be. Gideon is a little fearful and afraid to go and to do this, but he ventures out, though, because he knows that God is calling him, and God is leading him, and they gather up this 32,000, and he looks around, and he does not give the declaration that should be given at every battle. And the declaration was that if anyone is fearful and afraid, they can go back home. Anyone who is married, go back home. Anyone who has newly acquired a field, go back home. You have the option to do so. And Gideon didn't want to give that decree because he knew, look, if I say this, people are going to choose the easy way out. Now, it's two different points of view working at this time. One point of view is that God is saying, look, if I do this great deliverance, these people are going to take the credit to themselves. You know how we are as people. If something goes wrong, we don't want the blame. If something goes right, it was all our idea. So they're preparing to go to battle, and Gideon knows that if he gives this declaration that people are going to leave. He doesn't know how many will leave, but he doesn't have room to spare. He's already outnumbered 4-1. Moses said, when you go out to battle, give this declaration. And Gideon was like, hey, we're going to just skip this part and we're going to go out to battle. And God says, well, hold up, Gideon. It's too many people. I could picture Gideon probably saying, we don't have enough people. You're saying we have too many. We don't have enough. I was hoping to get more than this. So he gives the word, and of the 32,000, 22,000 people leave out. And so the number changes maybe from a picture like this to a different setting. It's like 10,000 people left. And maybe Gideon looks around and his numbers have changed now. And so now going out, instead of it being like a 4-1, the odds have increased. Now it's like 13-1. And the Bible says in verse 4 that the Lord said to Gideon, you still have too many people. Bring them down to the water, and I will try them there for thee. And there it shall be that of whom I will say unto you, this one will go, the same will go, of whom I will say, this one will stay, in the whomever I will say, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So they come down to the brook, the river, to be able to drink, and he watches what they do. And God says he's going to test them there. It says that I will bring them down, and I will say to you which one will go. As they got down to the water, the men began to demonstrate and to show themselves. You see, God was going to test them and to reveal and say to Gideon, take this one and leave that one. Take these over here, leave these over here. Patriarchs and Prophet says, by the simplest means, character is often tested. Those who in time of peril were intent upon supplying their own wants were not the men to be trusted in an emergency. The Lord has no place in his work for the indolent and self-indulgent. The men of his choice were the few who would not permit their own wants to delay the discharge of duty. The 300 chosen men not only possessed courage and self-control, but they were men of faith who had not defiled themselves with idolatry. Well, how did these men distinguish and show themselves opposite from the others? Well, the ones that got down on all fours, like to lap the water up like a dog, they were not prepared for battle because the enemy could come in and do them harm. But the ones that just squatted down, grabbed the water, and just kept their heads on a swivel and were looking around, observant of what was taking place, he said, these are the ones that you ought to take. They manifested themselves in one of the most simplistic means and ways. You know, God allows us, test us, and we are brought into different chapters, and sometimes it's in the small things that we reveal ourselves. Sometimes we do well in those small tests, and sometimes we don't do so well in those small tests. Like those soldiers who got down upon all their fours and preparing themselves and were fully immersed, sometimes we forget about the bigger picture, the things that are going on, and we get caught into those things. The ones that were all down, these were the ones not to take. And so now that thick crowd from 32,000 has dwindled to 10,000. And from 10,000, it goes down to 300. And as our numbers are decreasing, again, the ratio is also changing. So we've gone to a 4-1 to like a 13-1. And now we're looking more in the neighborhood of like a 500-1. It's not looking too favorable in terms of odds. The numbers have decreased significantly. And in the rest of Judges chapter 7, the story even gets more diverse in that God tells them for their weapons that they're to take out to them, that they don't take out swords. They take trumpets, lanterns, and vases. very unconventional as they're going out to battle. So they're going out against a number of soldiers that vastly outnumber them. They don't have traditional means to be able to defend themselves, and yet they go out in this way. And to complicate things, Gideon is told to take the 300 and divide them into groups of 3. Send 100 here, and 100 on this side, and yet 100 on this side. And as we read the story in Judges, a miracle takes place in that when the trumpet is blown, they smash the earthen vessels, they hold up their torches, and as the enemy looks around, they think that they're surrounded on all sides, and they begin in the confusion to fight and to kill each other off. Although, again, there are only 300 soldiers that Gideon actually has, and the 300 soldiers aren't the main ones doing the fighting. It is the enemy turning upon themselves because of the confusion that they're in. We usually stop at that particular piece, and we certainly talk about again the wisdom of God in doing this. And so we can again see contrasted here. This is like the wisdom of God. Like, who would ever would have thought of a plan like this? Who would ever had the bravery to go on 300 men against an army of 130,000? And who would have said to them, don't take swords, but go in and take brands of fire and some trumpets? Who would have told them to send part of your soldiers back home because they would have taken the glory unto themselves? But then there's a part of the story that we oftentimes don't look at, and we'll highlight it. It's in Judges chapter 8 and verse 27. So after the battle is over, and you read in Judges chapter 8 before verse 27, the people of Israel, they come to Gideon, and they say, Gideon, you've done so great, we want to make you our king. And Gideon says, I will not be a king over you, but we'll go back to our own places. And verse 27 says, though, that Gideon made an ephod thereof, and he put it in his city, even in Ophrah. And all Israel went there, a-whoring after it, which thing then became a snare to Gideon and to his house. So although Gideon had been instrumental in leading this tremendous battle, that ultimately God received the honor. God was praised. He was glorified because an army of 300 does not send 130,000 to flight. The miracles that took place all throughout just showed that God's hand was upon it every step. But then Gideon makes the faithful choice and the decision to make an ephod. The ephods were used by the priests, as you know. This was their means of being able to communicate with God. And so Gideon is taking a role that is not assigned to him. He says, I'm going to work and function as a priest. He forms an ephod, and now Israel is coming in to this service that he has instituted, but it is one that he has done on his own behest and not at the will of God. So the Bible says that this thing became then a snare to Gideon and to his entire house. So Gideon is making these choices. Now there's 6 points though that I want to bring out for us in terms of this story, and maybe some of its application then to us, because it's a story again that we've looked at and reviewed all along, but what about its application and its meaning to us? So 6 things that I want to share with us to consider. 1, considering again back in the context of 1 Corinthians, God uses the weak and those who are unlikely. He could have chosen someone else, but he's choosing Gideon to be able to go do this. And considering that, Gideon says so much of himself in Judges 6 and verse 15 that he is like the least in his father's house. But God is choosing him because Paul says that God is choosing the weak to be able to demonstrate something. God uses those things which are out of order to be able to display. So you may certainly not be the most talented or the most powerful, but God is saying, I want to use you to do service for me. I need someone who is humble enough so that as I work, they won't take the credit to themselves. They won't begin to misappropriate and to think that they are the ones who are working. Number two, we see then that faith that Gideon manifested, that it required action. He certainly had his doubts, and he went back and he said, well, Lord, if you really want me to go through and to do this, then I'm going to set out the fleece and let the fleece be wet and the ground dry. And then the next day, the fleece is wet and the ground is dry. You've had your fleece moment in which you've thrown it out. I've had the fleece moment in which we've thrown it out. And we're really not sure, but we want to follow in the will of God. Not understanding, well, does he want me to walk in this way? Does he want me to walk in that way? Let me throw out this fleece so that he might be able to answer. And it's important to understand again that God, he will guide us, he will lead us. But certainly in that, we know then that faith grows when we step out in obedience. The main point, again, when Gideon is trying to find out, so, well, Lord, if you really want me to do this, let it be known. I'm going to step out and follow you. I want to make sure I'm not just conjuring up something. This is not an idea that I have, but are you leading me to be able to execute and to carry this out? And certainly God begins to move. And then he reduces resources to be able to show his power. From 32,000 down to 300, he changes this to be able to demonstrate and to show forth he's in charge of this. You may have had some of your resources limited and cut off. Where it was once this, and now it begins to narrow down. What does it mean? It means, all right, here's an opportunity for me to be able to trust God. Am I still going to go through with the process that I know he has called and he's placed upon my heart? Or am I going to waver in it because I don't see? Well, I step forward in faith. Gideon has that same choice in that same decision that he must make ultimately about it, because it's not about the amount of resources. It is truly about God's blessing and God's presence. See, whether it was 300, whether it was 30, whether it was 3, it made no difference. He said, look, if you are one that is filled with the Spirit of God, then one man shall put 1,000 to flight. And that's what Zechariah begins to talk about when he says that the weakest shall be as David. And the strongest will be able to magnify as the angel of the Lord. When you put it in God's hand, then one is able to put the host of darkness to flight. So it wasn't about what was available. It was about God's blessing. Go around, find out what food is there. And the disciples came back and said, all we can find is 5 and 2. And Jesus said, well, that's more than enough. Go forth and now break it and give it to the people. And he prayed over it, and they went forth and they gathered up, and they had over 12 baskets of food that remained, because it is not based upon the resources. It's about the willingness. It's about the divine presence being there, God blessing it, so he multiplies it to bring him honor and to bring him glory. Number 4, we see again that obedience leads to victory. When we obey God, it ultimately always leads to victory. Now, of course, the methods that he uses may not make sense by human standards. People will wonder and question, well, why would you give tithe? Why would you give offering? Why would you not work on Saturday? Don't you know you could work overtime? You could work Friday night, and we'll give you 3 times as much to come in. You're saying, you know what? No, I'm not going to be able to come in and to work. Well, why not? Well, because this is God's holy time, and I want to honor him and to please him. Well, don't you know that if you work this time, then we'll give you more and more, and we'll give you this? Obedience always brings victory. And so Gideon demonstrates and exemplifies this, but by human wisdom, human beings, the worldly mind can't understand it. The worldly mind cannot comprehend it. But 5, we must beware of pride after success. Even though Gideon gained a great victory, he falls into a little trap by making this ephod. When we've had our greatest spiritual victories, That's the time that we should watch out, because the enemy seeks to come in and our greatest victories that we have enjoyed. Not maybe upon the mountaintop, but coming back down into the valley. Now Gideon is positioned to make this ephod, which is not going to be a blessing for Israel, but will ultimately be a curse for them. Recognize again that success can lead to spiritual complacency or to spiritual pride, which is a danger. We must stay humble and continue to keep God at the center of our lives. Number 6, God is our peace. Before the battle, Gideon built an altar in Judges chapter 6 and verse 24, in which he referred to it as being, the Lord is our peace. God will give us peace to guide us in every situation, in every uncertainty. And again, to the world, it may seem a little confusing, but consider the words from some of the other prophets in Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 24 and verse 25. Jeremiah writes, "Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom." And that would be the thing that the wise person would boast about, is how wise we are. He says, don't let the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Neither let the rich man glory in his riches, or those things that are strengths for us. Let's not get too big-headed and confident in them. You know that our greatest strengths can also be our greatest detriment. It's the thing that is like a double-edged sword. The thing that can bring us the greatest satisfaction in life can also be the thing that can bring us the greatest pain in life. The secret of the crowning of our success can also be, on the other hand, the thing that undoes us. Absalom's beauty that he had. Solomon's wisdom that he had. Samson's strength that he had. See, the devil often uses our strengths to exploit us and to turn those into our weak points. So we have to be mindful of that then. Whatever our strengths are that God has given, God gives us these strengths to be able to use. But keep in mind that, all right, well, whatever that strength is, it can also easily be used against me. So it could be a good thing to be independent. It could be a good thing to speak one's mind. It could be a good thing to not hold back and to be able to give. In terms of like someone's asking something, hey, I'm just going to say whatever. But wait a minute, that could also be turned against us. It's a good thing to be passionate and have the energy to be able to do something, but that could also be turned against us. So he's saying, look, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. Don't let the mighty man glory in his might. Don't let the rich man glory in his riches. Because those are the things that we can easily trust in. The wise will trust in his wisdom. This mighty man will trust in his strength and maybe bite off a little more than what they can chew. The rich man can glory in his riches. But let him that glorifieth glory in this, that he understands and knows me. That we understand and that we know him, that I am the Lord which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. And for in these things, this is what I delight in, saith the Lord. So it's not about, again, the possessions that you have, whether they are external or internal, but take your delight in knowing me. Delight yourself in knowing the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Jeremiah 9, 23 and 24. Deuteronomy 7 says that I, the Lord, I've called you. For you are a holy people unto the Lord your God. The God has chosen you to be a special people unto himself above everyone that is upon the face of the earth. Now this is given to literal Israel, but I think it's also applicable for every believing child of God. That I've called you, that you are a holy people unto me, above all the people that are upon the face of the earth. And God did not set his love upon you Nor did he choose you because you were more numerous than any other people. Because you were like the smallest of all people. Because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto our fathers, that the Lord brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you. So he's saying he hasn't called us then because we were great. He hasn't called us because we were strong. Because he's saying, look, I basically choose like the vagabonds or the misfits. I don't need the people. Not that he's saying not that I don't want the people who are all these things, but a lot of times those who have these things, they rely and they depend upon those things. I need someone who can recognize that no matter how wise they are, that their wisdom means nothing. I need someone who recognizes no matter how beautiful they are, that their beauty means nothing. The true beauty comes from my glory. I need someone that recognizes that their dependence is not upon reaching out to others as such, but their dependence comes in reaching out to me. I need someone who has faith to be able to trust me and not to depend upon themselves. So I don't care whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're black, whether you're white, no matter what you have, what you don't have, I need a willingness and a humble heart. So I don't care of those things. I called you because I want to set my love upon you. Because when I find a person or persons who are willing to empty themselves so that there could be room for the working of my spirit, the words of Zechariah ring true, saying not by might, it's like not by like the willpower, not by the brawn, not by the strength that we have, nor is it by power, but it is by my spirit, saith the Lord. All of the operation then, it goes by his spirit. It's hard for us sometimes to understand and to achieve that, because many times we feel we're the ones that have it happen. We're the ones that be able to make it happen. If it wasn't for us being able to do this, then this wouldn't have come to pass. And God is saying, look, don't get so full of yourself. I have 1,000 ways. It says if I were hungry, I wouldn't even bother to tell you. I have a cattle that are upon 1,000 hills. The entire earth is mine. All I need, if I needed, I could just reach out and to call, and all creation would come to my beck and call and say, how can we serve you? What can we do? But I don't even need to do that. I could just simply stand out and I can speak and it can come to pass. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit. And so even in spiritual battles and spiritual warfares, many times we think it is by might and by power. This, well, I'm going to read more, I'm going to pray more, I'm going to fast more, I'm going to do this more, do that more, and that's going to be the secret. So no, not that is not maybe a good thing to consider, but my spirit saith the Lord. Like that was in the vision that Zechariah was seeing in Zerubbabel. It's like those two olive trees in the building of the temple, saying, look, there are spiritual components. And the temple, people don't want it to be rebuilt. And Satan is trying to do all he can to dissuade it and to stop it. But the accomplishment of it is not done by human might, not done by human ingenuity. And again, this is not saying that there is no role that humans don't play in that. But ultimately what he is saying is by my spirit. If my spirit is there, then I'll bring these things to pass. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. So like now God gives his view on it. Like the first part, men were saying, this is our wisdom. And Paul borrows from it and talks about, well, then the foolishness of God. And again, he has no foolishness, but it's just like humoring us, entertaining us, if you please. Now he comes back and says that the reality is that God says, your wisdom is foolishness. So here we are, the world saying God's wisdom is foolishness, and God's saying, no, let me correct the record here. Your wisdom is foolishness. Here you are praying to an idol that can't see, that can't hear, that cannot move, that cannot breathe, that cannot have mercy, cannot offer compassion, cannot bring deliverance. In a fire, it burns up. In a fire, you burn up. And you put your trust in that. You store that in a fireproof safe because you know that if there's a fire, it will consume and this will be safe. And you put your salvation in that. Why not put your salvation in me? All ye to the ends of the earth, put not your trust in me. Your wisdom is foolishness. I read or heard the other day that someone, a company, has offered people to pay $200,000 to die, and they'll keep their bodies and preserve them like a nitrogen or something into the future, and then once we find a solution for whatever they died, they'll bring them back to life. Now, I am not a crook, but I was like, that's a good hustle. That is like a really good hustle. Like I would do it for like $20,000. It's a discount because you're only saying that we'll try to bring you back to life. It's not even a guarantee. It's like, hey, we'll find out and we'll try to bring you back to life. Like, hey, I'll do it for like a tenth of that. And someone will sign up for it because they believe in this. People spend millions of dollars traveling the world trying to find the fountain of life. Like it's in the Amazon or it's in the Indies somewhere. They'll drink the craziest of concoctions, do the weirdest things to their body. And we say that this is wisdom because we are saving ourselves. And God looks at all this and says, this is abject foolishness. This is foolishness. But we look and say that this is wisdom because we're figuring it out outside of God. But we can never figure it out outside of God. When we try to figure it out outside of Him, we only go in circles. It says, it is written that He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. So, all right, you think you can figure it out? Go right ahead and figure it out. It's a fool's errand. The saints recognize again that true deliverance and wisdom and salvation comes from God. The glory of it in Revelation chapter 4, verse 10 through 11, demonstrates that the 24 elders, symbolic of all mankind, will worship before the throne. We read in Philippians chapter 2 that every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess. All will cast their glittering crowns down at the feet of Jesus. The 24 elders, they fell down before Him that sits on the throne, and they worship Him that liveth forever and ever. They cast their crowns before His throne, and they say, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and power and honor. For you have created all things, and all things were made for your pleasure, and they all are created. They don't seek to ascribe any of the honor and the glory to Him, or rather to themselves. They recognize it is all but due to Him. Anything that we have accomplished and we have done, it all is due to Him. We're just like instruments. And any instrument He could have chosen. It's like, you consider Picasso could have painted anything with any of the paintbrushes. The one that was used, just the one that he picked up. It wasn't anything great that was about it. It was the ability of the artist. The same is true for the master artist. Nothing great in the talents that we have. It is just the willingness to be able to use them in His service. In letter 124, 1896, we read the following. It says that God chooses men of a humble and a contrite spirit through whom He can work, and He imparts to them His wisdom. They are little in their own eyes, and they will not interpret success as a result of their own smartness, but will glorify God. Not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. If men are entrusted with great responsibilities, this is no assurance of their fitness for their position. The assurance comes after test and trial. And the evidence that they sense their own weakness, that they make God their trust, the Lord will supply them with his wisdom. If they ask in faith, they will increase in knowledge and in ability. If they depend upon God day by day, the stages of development will show a symmetrical growth heavenward. If they will walk day by day in humility and contrition and wholeheartedness, in the strictest integrity, doing justice to their fellow human men, showing reverence and honor to God by being obedient and true to him, keeping the living principles of righteousness, of such God will honor. In Ephesians 2, he says that for by grace you are saved through faith. And this is not of yourselves. This is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to good works, which God hath before ordained unto all that we should walk in them. And so what is justification by faith? This foolishness of God that is proclaimed in teaching. It is the work of laying the glory of man in the dust and doing for man that which it is not in his power to do for himself. It is God's foolishness, his Christ, that becomes our righteousness, our sanctification, our might, that through his power we might indeed be saved. As we conclude, we'll go to our closing music, our closing song.
He promised us that he would be a counselor, a mighty God, and the Prince of Peace. He promised us that he would be a father, and he would love us with a love that would not cease.
Well, I tried him, and I found his promises are true. He's everything that he said that he would be. The finest words I know could not begin to tell just what Jesus really means to me.
For he's more wonderful than my mind can conceive. He's more wonderful than my heart can believe. He goes beyond my highest hopes and fondest dreams. He's everything that my soul ever longed for, everything that he promised, and so much more.
amazed just to think that this King of glory would come to live within the heart of man.
And I marvel just to know He really loves me when I think of who He is and who I am. For He's more wonderful than my mind can conceive. He's more wonderful than my heart can believe. He goes beyond my highest hopes and fondest dreams. He's everything that my soul ever longed for, everything that He promised, and so much more. More than amazing, more than marvelous, more than miraculous could ever be. He's more than wonderful. That's what Jesus is to me.
Is to me.
Everything that He promised and so much more. He's more than amazing, more than marvelous,
Jesus is.
more than
That's what my
miraculous.
Savior is.
He's more than wonderful, more than wonderful. That's what Jesus is.
That's what my Savior is.
To me,
Father in heaven, we thank you again for the mercy and grace that you always show us. Thank you that you are everything that we would ever need and desire. Help us to be able to realize that when we are tempted and swayed by the mighty currents of this world. Recognize that no matter what we might deem to be wise, that in your sight it is all foolishness. Help us then to have a spiritual mind to be able to understand and to see that the way that you've given to us is the way of the wise, as a way of life everlasting, and that to many, by choosing it, we will look to be foolish. But if we might be accounted to be wise in your sight, by opening our heart and life to you, allowing you to change us, to let your Son live today his righteous life within us. Pray that you would cause our glory to be humbled in the dust, that your righteousness and glory may be exalted in us. We humbly pray in Jesus' name, amen.